I'm Vivian Kelly, the editor of Mumbrella, and I'm here to moderate a panel about the youth, so Gen Z and millennials. And I think I came to this panel because I got a call from somebody at the IAB and they said, we need one of your young journalists to moderate this panel. And I got so wildly offended that I said, excuse me, I'll do it. I'm young. So I think I'm actually here out of spite more than anything to prove that I'm one of my own young journos. But this panel is about how millennials and Generation Z in particular are changing the way that we run our businesses and sell our products and services and wield an incredible amount of economic and cultural power. So these generations have been accused of killing so many industries, and so it can be terrifying for marketers who are desperate to understand and fit their brands into young people's curious lifestyles. So just quickly, if you could all introduce yourself, we might start down there with your name and job title, just so people can sort of understand who you are and why you're here.
Yes. Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Andrews and I'm the commercial editor at Daily Mail Australia.
Great. Hi, I'm Jessica Travers and I'm the consumer marketing manager at MAC Cosmetics.
I'm Whitney Meldrum-Hanna and I work at Pedestrian Group as a group strategy and response manager.
And I'm Lisa McIntyre, a Senior Insights Director at Engine, and I also lead Cassandra, which is Engine's youth research agency.
So I understand that there's been quite a bit of research amongst some of the panel members' companies into the lifestyles of millennials and Gen Zs. So Lisa, I believe, you guys did a bit of research into this?
If we're to look at them, so basically, like, I'm really interested in Gen Zs in particular. They're truly global citizens. They grew up in the world, not in the neighborhood, and they really are different to millennials. Their attitudes to finance and technology are completely different, and also the strains on them as well are also unto themselves as well. So and because of that, they need a lot of empowerment by brands to kind of help them move forward, like in the world. But they do have a lot of pressure on them, and they're a very interesting bunch.
And was there anything surprising in the research that you read and you thought, oh, I hadn't sort of considered that about Generation Z?
Well, Gen Z, I think one of the things that really set them apart from previous generations is their exploration of gender norms, or like discarding them. They are very sexually fluid, and that's something that really sets them apart. And some brands have kind of taken advantage of that. There's a Calvin Klein ad that came out in May, but that is something that really sets them apart. And it is surprising the way that they really have broken that out, and kind of breaking down the stereotypes of male and female. So that's a really great thing to see.
And Whitney, Pedestrian recently had what they called their Fun Fronts event, which I guess is a bit of a play on like the TV network's Upfronts events where they reveal what they're going to do for the next year. And Pedestrian spends a lot of time speaking to these types of audiences. So how can you use the sort of insights and research that maybe yourselves have done, or the sorts of things that Lisa's looked into, and talk to these generations without making them feel like you're relying on lazy stereotypes that they find frustrating?
Yeah, I think the big thing that came out of the Pedestrian Fun Fronts was that there's a lot of stereotypes that are really thrown around about youth culture. So everyone will have us believe that youth culture are these avocado eating, like pop culture fanatics who are tracking Kim Kardashian's every move. And for the PTV audience, this is actually true, but the PTV audience and the pop culture audience, this represents one lens of youth that we're speaking to. When we compiled the research across all of our other brands, we found that there are actually all of these different segments and needs across these different segments of youth. So we're looking at people who have different wants, who have different needs, and who need to be spoken to in different ways. when we spoke to them and asked them what their big concerns were for the world, it really shone through in what they told us. For instance, Pop Sugar readers are most concerned about mental health. 7 in 10 of them agree that this is the biggest concern facing them. For the PTV audience, 7 in 10 are really concerned about climate change and sustainability. When we talk to the Business Insider audience, everything around that is focused on job, employment, security, and future-proofing themselves. And when you talk to the innovators and the people who are really involved in tech, so your Gizmodo, your Lifehacker, and your Kotaku audiences, their lens of the world is all about data privacy, and they're really worried about what you guys are doing with their data, most likely because they're the people who will end up hacking us. So there is really these different lenses that we need to apply and really let go of those avocado-obsessed people who are frivolous with their money, because it's fundamentally not true.
And Crystal, how can other publications talk to these audiences without just going back to those lazy stereotypes that Whitney's talked about?
Yeah, look, to Whitney's point, there's absolutely no one site that's representative of all youth in Australia or all youth in the world. So the Daily Mail youth is going to be very different to a pedestrian reading youth or Pop Sugar or Business Insider. I think the answer is almost in the question. It's actually about looking at the research and looking at the insights to figure out exactly who it is you want to talk to, and that goes beyond segmenting just based on age, which is something that we really try to push back on the brands that we are working with and saying, okay, obviously you want to reach youth, and that might be a given based on the brand and the product, but what are their interests? What are their challenges and pain points? What are they looking for? What do they aspire to? And actually using that to shape the strategy in a more specific way has been really crucial to some of the success that we've had with campaigns that we've run. And certainly, I mean, we, as most publishers, have done quite a bit of research on the youth on our site, our youth audience as well. And we found that they're really in touch with their own identities, perhaps more so than previous generations, and maybe to a fault. So they do, as Whitney said, they do really rail against being lumped in together in a category that they feel like doesn't represent them. They really want to feel like they've been seen by a brand, seen by a publication, and delivered something that was just for them.
So speaking of being seen by a brand, Jessica, your brand side, how do you work with publications or even with your own communications strategy to, again, reach these audiences without making them feel like one homogenous group?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be really authentic when you're marketing to particularly this segment, or particularly the Gen Z and younger millennial segments. So we often say, like, you can't be everything to everyone. So when you look at your brand, and if you're from a more established brand, looking at your heritage, what stories do you have that you can leverage to really build a relationship, and an authentic relationship with this demographic? So for MAC, for example, we are more of a traditional brand. We've been in the market for 25 years, so we're not necessarily new and hot, which we know really does resonate with that Gen Z consumer, but we have some really authentic stories we can tell, and when we do tell those, so those are around our social responsibility through the MAC AIDS Fund and through our Back to Back program, which is a recycling program, which we've both been running for over 25 years. That really does cut through with this generation because they really appreciate that transparency and authenticity. And then when we're looking at partners, we're really looking at people that we feel are a good fit for both the brand and the consumer, but being mindful that we need to develop a strategy with numerous different touch points, because again, you can't be everything to everyone. So we might tap into the pedestrian audience and the Daily Mail audience to speak to different segments within that broader demographic.
And Whitney, what is the most sort of off-base characterisation you've heard about millennials or Gen Z that's been used by brands or publishers in an attempt to communicate with them? I know you mentioned the sort of financially irresponsible avocado munching lunatics, but like, what is something that's sort of become a bit of a, you know, a satire. Like people
Yeah.
sort of use that as a joke now. I don't think people genuinely believe that anymore. But what is one characterisation that people actually think is true and are trying to use to communicate with these youth audiences and totally missing the mark?
I think to Crystal's and Jessica's point, it's definitely about the age. The age that is a huge characterisation. Every day we'll get briefs that target 18 to 34-year-olds, and if that's what you're basing your communications strategy off, then you're really doing a disservice to that, because you cannot base any nuances or tension points within that audience and target effectively or create insights off the back of that.
As in, it's too broad.
It's too broad.
And what about you, Lisa? What are some sort of ridiculous things you've heard?
Well, I mean, like you look at the stats, you know, and it's like 22% of Gen Y and like 23% of Gen Z believe that they're accurately portrayed in the media. And, you know, I've spoken just before about how they're quite sexually fluid, they're really open with like gender and breaking down kind of those norms. And then you've got Calvin Klein who kind of hopped on the bandwagon in May this year, and they had an ad with Bella Hadid. She's like a supermodel, and she appeared with this CGI little Michaela, yeah. And in the ad, like the campaign's all about being authentic and true to yourself. And you know, in the ad they had them, you know, making out, and it's like Bella is very much a heterosexual, you know, and you know, Michaela is not real, and so it's kind of like, what is the message here? And obviously it's very targeted at Gen Z. But the thing is that Calvin Klein had really missed a beat, and they did apologise afterwards, because the thing is that they had missed. Like, this was an amazing platform for them to put real people up, people from the LGBTQ community up there, and they hadn't bothered. They'd gone with a supermodel and a CGI. But we could talk about the Michaela all day, because people spend a lot of money online in their gaming life on clothes and accessories and things like that. But that one was one that really did miss the mark, and it's a huge brand. They still didn't get it right.
And Crystal, the Daily Mail comment thread can be something to behold. It certainly puts the Mumbrella comment thread to shame. So I imagine if you get something wrong, you would be likely to hear about it. So how do you sort of make sure that you're not making these missteps or mischaracterising them when you're trying to talk to them?
Yeah, look, interesting, because that was one of the tropes, I guess, or the assumptions about youth that really stood out to me, is that sometimes brands, and maybe publishers too, think that it's really easy to attach a social cause or a purpose-driven marketing strategy, you know, put it out there for youth and think that that's enough, and that this audience is maybe too lazy to follow up on it, and they're happy to just do the filter of the photo, and that's enough. We definitely see, and I'm sure that everyone's aware that a lot of brands have seen that if you don't have the chops to back it up, and that there isn't something genuine behind that cause or purpose-driven marketing, that this generation in particular won't stand for it. So I think it is about being really genuine in those pursuits. And again, it's not being all things to all people. So if we're going to stand for something, we don't need to pick every single cause. Brands don't need to do that either, but the ones that you do pick and you put out there to resonate with younger audiences, you have to be really genuine and have something behind it to back it up. That's, I guess, really what's going to help you maybe weather some of those storms or avoid them. Yeah.
I think to that point, Gen Z, they're just not a passive consumer. So I think you know, technology has really enabled that two-way dialogue. So you'll find your Gen Z consumer doesn't, and probably a younger millennial consumer also, doesn't want to be spoken to. They want to have a conversation. So I guess when we're looking at how we speak to them and how we build that relationship, that's so important. And I say build a relationship, and that's, I guess, something to call out there, that you do need to build that relationship, and you do need to sustain it. It's a long-term relationship. Gen Z consumers aren't brand loyal. They, you they hop around. So you've got to maintain that relationship with them and build depth in it. So you'll find that we do a lot of things to do so. So, for example, when we work with influencers, we're not working with a different influencer every single day. We're actually building long-term relationships with our influencers. We actually call them brand partners because they're so much more than an influencer. It's not just putting a lipstick on their page. We work with them and we say to them, guys, like, you're the ones on the ground. You know this consumer better than anyone else. You're one of them. You tell us. Like, we want you to be our sounding board. We want to bounce off each other. Like, do you think this is something that will resonate? What's the community saying on these platforms? Like, feed that back to us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point from both of you that, sometimes brands mischaracterize them and think that they're going to be sort of too lazy to get in touch and let them know that they've missed the mark. And, you're saying that that's absolutely incorrect. But these generations have been accused of killing brands and industries. So I was actually going to put it to the panel, is that a fair characterisation, or is the onus actually on brands? Like, did brands spend far too long focused on the boomers and not notice who was emerging underneath them?
I'd love to jump in on this one and ask the audience, who came in an Uber today? So put your hands up if you travelled in an Uber. Have you booked a holiday on Airbnb in the last year or so? Hands up. I think it's really lazy assumption to think that millennials or the youth are killing industries when it's just a reaction of market forces, and it's sort of this innovate or die culture. Millennials or youth culture are only a really small percentage of the total addressable market, so to blame the fact that industries are being killed by them is just not true across the board. Right here.
Lisa, you look like you agree.
Yeah, no, they're definitely not killing brands and industries. Brands and industries are killing themselves by not being agile, and that also comes from not listening either. We've got Forever 21 that just died, and that was it's $1 billion fast fashion company, and they just weren't competitive enough. There's the rise of commerce, obviously, and H&M and Zara, but there's also the rental brands as well, like Rent the Runway, which is really taking off. But there's also a lot of sustainable fashion brands that are coming up as well, and it's that kind of rise of the environmental consciousness, which the 7-Eleven talked about just before, which is really, really important and becoming more important. And Forever 21 got on board too late. They tried to, paint a picture of sustainability in a fast fashion world, and basically they just missed the boat. So again, not listening, not getting that feedback, and not being agile enough as well. So,
and Jessica, you mentioned that you're not necessarily a young up-and-coming brand. So how have you managed to evolve with your communications and not be one of those brands or companies that the millennials have killed or moved on from, if that language isn't correct?
Yeah, I don't think we can say that Gen Z is necessarily killing brands or killing the industry. I think they're definitely holding us accountable. I think that's great. It really encourages growth. So it's really important that we continue to grow and evolve, and we absolutely challenge ourselves every single day to do so. I think we're having a conversation just before this panel, and I was discussing the amount of media I consume, which is slightly ridiculous, but absolutely necessary. We need to be listening to these conversations. We need to have our ear to the ground, and not one person can do that. You really need to tap into everyone in your business, but also be conducting social listening and be agile enough to act on that. And I know it can be very challenging when you work in a big organisation. Sometimes you do feel like you're trying to turn the Titanic. But you just need to be as reactive as you can in whatever ways you can do so. That would be my advice.
And Crystal, we've talked a lot about what we shouldn't do and a lot about what people are doing wrong, but when sort of developing brands or marketing communications or content for this generation, what are some of the guidelines you think that people should be doing that will resonate well and help them find a place in young people's lives?
Yeah, look, obviously the big buzzwords in this arena are authenticity and transparency. That's definitely true. But where I guess the brands that we partner with, where we see really great success with youth audiences, is just having that willingness to be on the platforms that they are actually on. So we partnered with MAC for the Love Me lipstick campaign a few months ago, and took that content out to Snapchat, where we know that Daily Mail Australia has 65% of our Snapchat audience is Gen Z. So it was perfect for the brief, it was perfect for the audience that MAC was trying to reach. And fantastic that the MAC team were really willing to be there, even if it wasn't a medium or a platform that they had traditionally been on, because these generations are different. They're consuming media in different ways, disrupting that industry as we've spoken about. So it is that willingness to sort of experiment with, maybe it's the platform, maybe it's the format and medium, trying different kinds of messaging. That's really kind of the key to success.
Yeah, and I think
for us.
to that point, what was so great about that activation was, so we did some branded editorial, I guess you would call it advertorial content with Daily Mail, so it lived both on Daily Mail and then on Snapchat. But what we did with it was we obviously told the story we wanted to tell, but rather than giving Daily Mail our branded visuals from our global teams, we worked with a set of influencers that we knew would resonate with that Gen Z consumer to create lipstick-focused content, and then that was actually utilised within the story. So I think what was really nice with that, when we talk about how can we be more agile, I can't say to the MAC Global team, hey guys, like I'd like you to use this model because she's going to resonate much better in little Australia. But what I can do is work with a set of influencers to create secondary content and then repurpose that within this ad format. So I know that's a very tactical example, but it's just to share with you how you can be a little bit more agile.
And Whitney, you must be exposed to so many brands and people trying to communicate to this audience. So what are successful ones doing differently? Do you have any examples of brands that have actually been successful in applying these types of communication strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been working with PepsiCo for a number of years, specifically Doritos, and it's a bit of a cheeky example because Doritos' tagline is all about being bold, and they really embody this from the time that they brief us to the end of the campaign and when we get rebriefed for a new product launch. But their whole mantra is around being around defining moments of pop culture. So they always come to Pedestrian TV for insights, and those insights really do fuel those ideas. We were recently tasked with launching the wasabi flavour in Australia, and our insight that led this campaign was all around the fact that young people are the first generation to sort of have their lives constantly and chronically updated online, and because of this abundance of information and the fast pace of technology, they're actually the first generation to experience early onset nostalgia. And speaking to that authenticity tone, anything that we talk about on Pedestrian TV that references 90s culture or 2000s culture just pops off. It's always like the top editorial news story of the day. And so we really took this insight and harnessed it across the campaign, and we created the hottest throwback mixtape of 2019, where we resurrected an Australian Idol, Lee Harding, who is infamous for his Wasabi campaign, and we made him recreate it and use it as a consumer promotion to entice people to buy the product. We don't have the sales metrics yet. I'm sure we will get it in a couple of months when we receive that from the brand team, but the engagement metrics just absolutely killed it. So it's really understanding where your consumer is, what their worldview is, and understanding the platforms that they're on and how you can leverage them best to communicate your brand.
And Lisa, Whitney's touched on it there, that young people, one thing we do hear pretty consistently is that young people are overwhelmed, and whether it's because of the sheer amount of content out there or social media that Whitney touched on, or pressures from online life, the impending destruction of the planet, or whatever it may be, how can brands and publishers or sort of communicate and make these people feel empowered to and navigate this state of mind without sort of exploiting it in a negative way?
Yeah, well, as I've kind of said before, like, they're obviously overwhelmed by financial concerns, and, they feel anxious. This is especially like the Gen Zs, but like feeling anxious because they're not reaching the life milestones of previous generations, which were markers of success. You know, like buying a house and a fancy car and having a family, not those things. You know, what brands can do is basically through tone and messaging help empower them. I mean, we talked about mental health, and that's going to be the next biggest health crisis, absolutely. And this affects how they absorb media, what medicine they buy, how much they're spending, things like that. And you know, we did some research for an event called Stand Up to Stand Out, and we did, and in the research, it kind of boiled down to 6 principles of a question about what the expectations of next generations mean for the future of brands. And so to make a successful brand today, it's basically like teach them, you know, one word, edutainment, and which is basically like the YouTube channels and things like that. And the next one is, you know, stand for something, create a community, be entertaining, help them be their best selves, and make their lives easier. And all these principles will basically help them move forward in life, and it will help also like with the mental health, especially making their lives easier as well. And that's, you know, through education, and just putting a hand out, and not just to get that dollar either.
I think to that point as well, when you're working with a brand, it's really important that you do stand for something and challenge the status quo. When we embarked on our research, we spoke with over 6,000 young people between 13 to 35, and the one message that we really took from it was that they do feel really disenfranchised by their parliament reps, whether it's changing climate change or it's action on lockout laws or whatever it is. They feel like their reps don't represent them, so they're consistently and constantly looking towards brands to empower them in different aspects as well. And we actually asked our audience, we said to them, if you were PM for a day, what would you do? And it came down to 3 different streams of consciousness, which is once again reflective of the platforms and the different types of people we talked to. The first one was that the Gizmodo, Lifehacker and Kotaku audience said that they would immediately fix the housing crisis, and then they would fire all of the NBN executives out of a cannon into the sun and get rid of that complete department. For the Pop Sugar readers, it was all around mental health and funding marginalised groups and women and really pushing that forward on the agenda. For the PTV audience, it was all about climate change. But first they were going to chill out because we can't solve all of the problems in a day. But then we would get really stuck into climate change. And the fourth reader was the Business Insider audience, who are a little bit hedonistic. They're like PTV people with a lot of cash. So they, if there was a word cloud that we could use to describe these guys, it would be Curability House and throwing a bloody rager party because they're sick of their parliament reps.
So, Crystal.
Sorry, if I could just jump in there. It's actually such an opportunity though, isn't it? Because as disenfranchised as they feel, and as much as they don't believe that politicians are really serving their needs right now, they actually do believe that brands can do part of that job. So it is a real opportunity to sort of, as you say, pick something, align to it and say, this is how we're going to actually help you create some change here, because millennials and Gen Zs still do believe that they actually can make a difference, which is really beautiful. They are frustrated, but they haven't given up, and they're just looking to different avenues to kind of make these things happen, which is a great entry point for maybe brands to come in and fill some of that void, publishers as well, and all kinds of different organisations.
But also brands, you know, and they recognise that that brands have the means, but also the visibility to help project their voice to make a change as well. So that's where the kind of expectations come in as well, you know, to get something done. So
Now, I have one more question left, but I believe there is an app where you guys can be submitting questions, Slido. So we will get to those if there are any. And I think there is a prize as well for best question of the day. So you've got a few more minutes while I throw this final question to think of something really spicy to try and get yourself a prize. But we've talked all about who these generations are, what they want, how they're feeling, what people do wrong, what people do right. But how do you measure the success of everything we've talked about? You know, the IAB's big on measurement, so we should tackle this one. How do you measure the success of communicating with these generations? And indeed, are the metrics for success even always the same, or do you have to change it for sort of every piece of communication that you're doing? We might start down that end.
Yeah, well, I guess from a publisher's perspective, it is always going to be engagement. What that engagement looks like for different audiences might vary, but that's really what we focus on, particularly as we've said, these younger generations are probably more willing to share and voice their opinion. So you can kind of have some more oversight into what's actually going on there. But engagement's certainly king for us. We've also started to roll out more control and expose brand studies to kind of measure the effectiveness of the campaigns that we're running even more so, and just get really granular into what is being affected.
And Jessica, what about you for a brand?
I mean, it's a difficult question because it really does differ by platform. I think generally speaking though, the younger the consumer, the more engaged they are. Older consumers generally consume content but don't actually physically engage with it as much. They're not as likely to, you know, press the heart or to leave a comment as a younger consumer would be. If we look at Instagram, for example, traditionally, as of 5 years ago when it launched, it was all about likes and then comments. But now we're actually looking at things like saves and shares and direct messages. Again, like when I talk to our brand partners, I often say to them, you tell me why you think this partnership has been successful, because there are certain metrics I can see, but you might be having really positive conversations and changing perceptions about the brand in your direct messages, and we might not have visibility to that. So the onus is really on them just as much as it is us, and each publisher to show us how we're shifting perceptions, and then ultimately sales data. We have CRM, so we look at our CRM system and we see, are they buying? Is there that frequency there? What does loyalty look like?
And Whitney, you mentioned you might not have all the data yet on the wasabi stuff for Doritos, but when that comes in, what will you be looking at to measure its success?
I think we're sort of at the preview of clients who want to share that data with us. From my role day to day, we always look to drive business outcomes. And what this looks like with our clients and with our brands is that we will sit down and have a conversation with them about what the KPIs of success are and what the metrics are for that. But it also does come down to an alignment on a marketing and communications strategy. So it's understanding what the brand wants, where they can fit in within our platform suite, and also understanding what the sweet spot is for the audience, where they can engage and drive creativity as an ROI.
And Lisa, how would you define success for communicating with Gen Z?
The E word, in engagement. You know, it's not likes really so much anymore, is it? Because we've seen Facebook and Insta crack down on that and hide those numbers. So really, it's shares, absolutely, and it's what they're saying in the chat rooms as well, like these online communities. And social proofing is so important for brands now. And when I say that, it's basically the reviews that are being generated by people who use your brand, and brands are relying on that. I mean, just look at Airbnb, who are all about the reviews afterwards. So definitely the engagement. Yeah.